Welcome back to the Art Inside the Craft podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Glazier, and this is episode number 30. Today's episode is very exciting for me personally, as I came to discover today's guest, A.J Croce, through his father, Jim Croce, whose music I have listened to and studied over the past 36 years. A.J has built his career through a complete dedication to his craft, and while his famous last name may have got people to answer the door, A.J's talent is responsible for kicking it open and allowing him to collaborate with legends like Leon Russell. We discuss his journey to music and how after a career of his own originals, he created a unique tour that highlights his father's music as well as his own. Let's listen in on that interview now with A.J Croce. So obviously we're here to talk about kind of the tour, but would you mind just if we talk a little bit about your road getting there first before we get into that?
Sure, absolutely. How much time do we have, Jeremy? So, I started playing piano when I was a little kid. Mm-hmm. Could barely walk and would shuffle over to the piano and start playing. And so it was always sort of part of my life. And when I was, a teenager, I got really into all kinds of music. I had my dad's record collection, but it was Ray Charles was sort of my gateway drug. And so I started, listening to all that music and then collecting more that was like it. And my dad's record collection was really diverse. There was a lot of soul music like Sam Cooke and Otis Redding and Solomon Burke and lots of great rock and roll stuff and all of that. But then there was great old blues like Mississippi John Hurt and Blind Blake and
wonderful.
And Gary Davis and Bessie Smith and Fats Waller, kind of more in the jazz world. And it was all over the map, as well as folk music and old country and all kinds of stuff. So I had kind of a broad sense of what I liked. And, as a kid, I lost my sight when I was 4. So I would put the records that I liked over on the left side of the record cabinet and would just grab, literally blindly and see what I was going to get. Huh. If I really loved something, I would put it all the way over to the far left. And so that's how my interest in records started. Cool. When I was a teenager, I started playing professionally. At first, just here and there. When I was 12, I got my first paid gig playing piano, and then when I was 16, after having played with a couple different bands doing, rock and roll, sort of garage band rock and roll, and then another band was more of a jazz thing. And I was playing, by 15, I was playing 4 or 5 nights a week at jazz clubs and blues clubs and all ages venues doing the rock and roll stuff. And punk rock clubs, all kinds of places, And then at 16, I had an opportunity to sort of tour around Southern California with a guy named Floyd Dixon. Floyd wrote songs like "Hey Bartender" and "Wine, Wine, Wine" and "One Scotch, One Beer."
Cool.
And he was sort of a big figure on the Central Avenue scene in the 50s and 60s and so on. And so this was in the 80s, and he and I would play these little clubs all over Southern California, and he would give me advice on it. I'd start off playing, opening up for him, and then he would play a set, and then I would join him, and we'd play those 4-handed boogies like they did in the 40s, like Meade Lux Lewis and Albert Ammons or Pete Johnson used to play, sometimes 6-handed boogies like those. And so that really turned me on to that music and in a very real way. And then at 17, a woman named Mae Axton heard me play. She was a songwriter and publisher. She wrote "Heartbreak Hotel" for Elvis, among many other songs. And she was a real champion of mine. And she called up Cowboy Jack Clement. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he was a staff engineer and songwriter for Sun Records, starting in '53 to about '60 when he went independent, left Memphis and came to Nashville. And so Mae Axton called up Cowboy and said, "You got to hire this kid." He did. And that was my very first recording session. It was here in Nashville where I live now.
Wow, cool.
And I didn't realize I was filling in for Jerry Lee Lewis. As I walked in, Jerry Lee walked out.
Wow.
And I looked at the band that was sitting on his couch in his office, and it was Elvis's band, Jerry Sheff, Ron Tutt, and James, and it was very heady,
Wow, yeah, I can imagine.
Wow, this is crazy. James Burton, man, it blew my mind, and that really changed my perspective of what Nashville was about, but it also changed my idea of music in a lot of ways. And I had sung and I had written, but at that point I was more of a piano player than anything else. And the three things I did at that point sort of developed on their own. As a songwriter, I developed by doing it every day and writing with a lot of other people, and collaboration, writing with great writers, and then singing, singing all the time. About a year later, I was 18. I played a gig, and B.B. King was there. He saw me play and asked if I wanted to go on the road. And after that, I got signed and had a manager and an agent, and had an opportunity to go on the road. And I know it's sort of a long story, but that's how it started. And then I got to play with some of my heroes, including Ray Charles.
Wow. Yeah, that's an incredible story, incredible life. And so I was going to say, your main instrument is piano, and you've said, written and played with some of the giants, not just on piano, but music in general. And when you kind of look back at that time that you spent with them, and you don't have to really name anyone, but can you kind of recall like specific or maybe inadvertent things that you picked up? Either because they suggested, or like you said, they just said, keep going keep doing what you're doing.
There was all kinds of advice from different people. I would periodically take lessons more about theory than anything else. Like I said, I started when I couldn't see. So it was once I, got at least part of my vision back, I was able to see the chords I was making and start to understand it visually, as well as just by the way it sounded and so forth. And so I took lessons periodically, still do, and more maybe about theory than anything else. Playing to, I had, a producer say, "You should practice to a metronome," which I did, and then another producer said, "Practice with a drummer, don't practice with a metronome, because you want the living person to be there, and you want to be able to understand how someone else plays, and they may not play like a metronome, but they may be wonderful." And then different ways of playing the parts, listening to Alan Toussaint from my early teens really taught me how to arrange horns and what I'd want for harmonies. And, he was just sort of all in one, a producer and songwriter and great piano player and singer and arranger. And that really inspired me.
And I was just going to say, I just also watched your Pace Studio, that set from 2020. And man, that version you did of the Billy Preston Nothing from Nothing was just incredible.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh man, that was just on fire. Yeah, you'd said something about you're glad Yamaha had brought that piano in, because that's a tough one to play on something that doesn't move.
Yeah. It's true. Certainly the way I play it, it's you got to have all the keys need to work.
Yeah. Oh man. And so for some people who may not know that are listening, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but you kind of purposefully stayed away from performing your father's stuff publicly anyway, in order to establish yourself and your own brand of music. And I'm going to guess that was also kind of a struggle on its own, just to be doing your own thing, obviously with the Croce last name.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was bittersweet. I think I got opportunities, maybe a couple doors open, but they don't stay open unless you have something to back it up with. And I was fortunate too that some of my songs had charted, and so that, and were being used in films and so forth. So that was something that was a positive. But honestly, I was also really involved, and have always been involved in his publishing. About 10
Wow.
years after I got started, I the copyrights reverted, and I had already been doing my own publishing and working with big publishers, and so I was really in a very good place after a decade of it to understand what to do and what not to do with his catalog. And I really was, it's a family thing. So it was a little different than working my music, but I really was in a good place to be able to contribute to his legacy behind the scenes. I didn't feel at that point in my life that there was any integrity in me just playing his stuff. It was something I would do at home sometimes.
Sure.
I would do it for fun, but it wasn't until I picked up guitar in my early 30s and found that as a piano player, fingerstyle guitar playing came natural. and and so it started with playing Sonny Terry and Brownie McGhee stuff, and then learned a little Mississippi John Hurt. And then by that point, that stuff was so similar in a way. I know it doesn't seem like it, but once you have
It
that,
does.
once you can play Coffee Blues or Salty Dog or one of those things that John Hurt did, then you can play Operator, and you can play
Yeah.
other stuff. So it kind of started. It started that way, and it was also that guitar gave me an instrument that I didn't know. So I really simplified my songwriting from the music, from the composition perspective. It focused more on words during that period than just on the complicated chords I could see on a piano, or that I understood, or just went to, by inclination. And so I think something happened in around that time. It was probably 20 years ago now, when I had this, I was transferring a bunch of my father's music from a reel to reel to digital, just for archiving sake. And these were home recordings, like, many of his recordings were home recordings that we had. And so this particular tape had all these songs that I had played since I was 13 years old. And they were really obscure tunes by some of the artists I mentioned, but they weren't the hits. It wasn't like Ain't Misbehavin' by Fats Waller, or,
Uh-huh.
Rose. It was You're
Deep
Not the
cuts.
Only Oyster in the Stew. And it was the deep cuts of relatively obscure artists, and we were playing the exact same songs. We chose the same songs to play, and I realized we had this connection.
Hmm.
Just the hairs on my neck stood up when I heard
Fascinating.
that one song after another. And so I realized we had something in common that was something that I felt could be shared in a way I didn't know exactly how.
Hmm.
And then what would have been his 70th birthday 10 years ago, I did a one-off show playing guitar and piano, and had a bunch of little guests at a small club at my mom's place, actually at Croce's, to
Oh yeah.
celebrate what would have been his 70th birthday. And I saw how happy and engaged the audience was, and realized that there was something there that could be really, really amazing if I did it at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And it took another 5 years or so before I really came up with this idea of Croce Plays Croce, which incorporates my father's music, my music, and the music that connects us.
And that's actually a perfect lead in because I was just going to get into the tour. Can you just run down, like you spoke a little bit about it. So is the show, like, is your performance night to night kind of constructed so it tells a story, or is it kind of open? Can you move songs in and out, or are you really trying to tell kind of a specific story with what you're doing?
I have a lot of flexibility. There's stories with a lot of the songs and where they came from, where my father, got the ideas from, or in some cases the influences where they came from, whether they were musical or lyrical. For example, something like "Don't Mess Around with Jim" is sort of a combination of these sort of R&B classics that you would have heard by Lieber and Stoller. You know, they wrote for everyone. They wrote for Elvis, but they wrote for the Coasters, and they wrote for the Drifters, and they wrote for all these different groups, and they wrote these great character songs, whether it was Little Egypt or Charlie Brown or Smokey Joe's Cafe or Kansas City. And then you have this guitar part. My dad growing up on South Street in Philadelphia, especially in his early years, you really heard a lot of different kinds of music, and you hear Jimmy Reed in there. You hear that guitar line that's so similar. And I'm not giving the introduction to the song right now. I'm just talking to you about it, know. But the stories that go with these songs can vary night to night, just as the set list. I think one of the most enjoyable things about the show is it's pretty energetic. I've got an amazing band with me of some pretty legendary, all Grammy winning musicians, and we get to really have a lot of fun. Of course, we play the hits, but we also play some of the deep cuts that are a lot of fun and that relate to the bigger story. And I think when you ask, is there one story I'm trying to tell? I think it's a bigger story. In a way, it's not about the legacy of one man, but of two. And so that is the goal. My goal is to entertain the audience. And so, there's laughing, there's crying, and
wonderful.
And there's singing, there's stomping, every night is really fun. And while, there's a limited number of songs of my father's that I could play, I have 30 years of recording as well as thousands and thousands of songs that we have in common. So the set can change. The songs that I might play of mine might change depending on what I'm playing of his, depending on what influence I might draw from to create a unique set.
And having said all that, do you have kind of a favorite time during the show, or maybe not specifically a certain song of either yours or your dad's or one of the influences that you kind of look forward to just because of the way the audience reacts, or how it makes you or the band feel when you're performing that? You kind of get that with everything.
No, it's I think there's a couple factors. First of all, the audience plays a huge role in it. Their mood really influences mine, and if it's an energetic crowd, then it's a really energetic show. And even if it's a quiet crowd, it's still an energetic show. But if they're into it, then we have this ability to have a far more dynamic performance. I think any time that I can go off script and make a right turn or left turn somewhere, and the band, I look at the band and they don't know where I'm going or what's going to happen. That's always the fun moment, because it keeps the show so eclectic and fun.
Kind of reminds me of there's a real famous story Herbie Hancock tells about playing with Miles Davis, where he's performing something and he hits the wrong note that he should have played, and Miles stops for a second, and then he takes off on that note and makes it right. And it kind of seems like jazz is kind of like that, but that's really does make it exciting when you don't know maybe what's going to happen, but it just comes out beautiful,
That's the thing I love about jazz, but that's the thing I love about music. You play the wrong note enough times on purpose, and it's no longer a wrong note.
Right.
Um, and Miles Davis did something else that was really unique, which was encourage them to play something different every night, even if it was recorded one way. Um, you know, he didn't want them to continue to play the same thing. He wanted them to push for something unique. And it's what I try and do with my playing and my singing every night.
Yeah, that's great. I just got a couple more questions and then we can wrap up. And I have to say probably two of my favorite, which, like I said, I've been listening for almost 40 years now. I'm 48. So two of my favorite Jim Croce songs are A Long Time Ago, which I struggled for a super long time to learn how to play on guitar. And box number, yeah. And then box number 10, which are both on You Don't Mess Around with Jim, which just hit the 50-year mark. And you kind of touched a little bit on the catalog issue, but I know that BMG put out an anniversary edition, and I was just kind of curious, like, coming up as far as his music, are you able to get involved? Do you have any plans to, like, re-release stuff from the catalog or do anything? Like, I know there was a record store day last year, or 2021, I think, so just curious about that.
Yeah, I'm very involved on a daily basis, even when I'm touring. BMG has been wonderful, and so it's 50 years this year since the second two albums were recorded. So You Don't Mess Around with Jim celebrated 50 years last year, and we did a 50th anniversary tour, more multimedia and a bigger group with singers and more players and all of this video footage and things like that, which we'll do again this fall to include all three albums.
Wonderful.
But yes, they'll all be released on vinyl. They'll be released on CD. Of course, they'll be streaming digital. This spring, we'll have a release of the Apple versions of it that are, the 3-dimensional sound, which is really, really amazing. Cool. Spatial audio, which I think is pretty nuts. Being able to hear things that way and turn your head and hear a different instrument in a different way, really wonderful.
Wow.
So all through this year, we'll be celebrating what would have been his 80th year, and also what would have been the 50th anniversary of those two albums. His career was very brief. It was 18 months.
Right.
And so it's it's kind of amazing what he accomplished in such a short period of time.
Mm-hmm. Sure is. Well, that's good. That's fantastic to hear, because I mean, I've been, like I say, there's not a week that goes by I don't play at least one or two complete albums of his, just because it's, like I said, it's kind of like that litmus test I put everything up against. If it's not at least half as good as what those albums are, then it's not worth listening to. So,
well,
yeah.
And I'll tell you, A Long Time Ago is a tricky song because it's not the same. The first verse goes into the chorus, and you would assume that the second verse would go into the chorus the same way, but it's half long, and it plays the opposite chords of the chorus and bridge, and so it's unorthodox, to put it one way.
Yeah.
And box number 10 is my favorite. It's always been one of my favorites. It's one of the first songs of his that I learned on guitar, and it's a great first album. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you, I played it from beginning to end last year, and it was a lot of fun.
Wow. Yeah, and just like I said, those stories from those two, just the lyrics and the sentiment is just so incredible, just mind-blowing. Well, so what's next for you then with your music? What do you have planned coming up, I guess?
Well, there's a lot. I'll be going in to the studio in May to record a new album of originals. I'm always collaborating with different folks. And so to me, that's always fun. And I'm writing I'm writing a memoir of short stories as well about my life, and it touches a lot on his. And I'm trying to think what else. There's a documentary that company is making about me. I don't know where that stands, but I think it'll be out next year. And it's taken up most of my time between that and being able to, practice everything every day, stay creative. That's my job.
I honestly cannot thank AJ enough for taking the time to speak to me about his career. 2023 marks the 50th anniversary of Jim Croce's 3 legendary albums that he released before his passing in 1973. AJ currently has dates scheduled through early 2024 performing Croce Plays Croce, the 50th anniversary, and having had the opportunity to see him live, it is definitely a must-see show. I want to thank my sponsors, Ink 19, the glass-bottom boat of the cultural press, with some of the best music, concert, book, and film reviews available, as well as Black Cat Bone Productions, which you can find on Instagram. Stay tuned for a ton of more exciting episodes, and as always, I will catch you all down the road.